Hello again. Thank you for joining me in another video. So today I thought I would give you a personal story, something from my life that was crazy, and it's one of those stories that I love to tell people because it was so weird, and every time I hear it, even still now 30 years later, it's like incredible that that happened. Um, Yeah, so this is the story about the time I fell 30 feet off a cliff. And I did get injured. So it wasn't that it was without injury, it's that the injury was really well managed by a strange set of circumstances. So I guess before I go into the how did that happen? How did you fall off a cliff? Um, I, the people that I was actually there with was kind of the weird, life can just sometimes bring people into your life, and then you find all these strange, overlapping qualities of how, how perfect it is in some regards. So the house I grew up in had the next door neighbor's house was a rental. It was actually, I think, a triplex. And I was a junior in high school. I had actually dropped out of high school halfway through my junior year. I went back later, partly because of falling off a cliff, but I was so seriously bullied. It was brutal. It was really brutal. So I grew up in a poor neighborhood, and ended up going to a high school in a nearby suburb. And the suburban kids they had different rules. And I didn't understand the rules. And basically, a few of us from my neighborhood that went would get surrounded, and kind of that weird arm linking and fights, and just atrocious bullying behavior, beyond name calling. It's stick they'd chew a whole pack of gum, and then take that big wad and rub it through your hair, so you had almost no chance of getting the gum out, unless you had an old farmer grandma like I did. So she knew how to get that stuff out. And this wasn't grade school. This was not middle school. This was high school. So people who definitely should have been mature enough not to feel threatened by someone to the point where you needed to destroy their life in some capacity, especially when we were poor kids, right? We were three poor girls. So, and we'd get surrounded pretty often. And so I halfway through my junior year, after a couple of years of this, I stopped going. I put a lock on my bedroom door, and there was nothing my mom was going to do to open that door and get me to go. Well, actually, it was my sister who had to get me out the door because my mom was at work already. And I just refused. I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't take it anymore. You're not learning when you're in an environment where you're getting bullied to that degree, where you're actually almost afraid for your safety in that capacity. It's not like I had such a joyful childhood before then that I had all of the resources necessary to know how to trust adults to help manage getting, people in your face in the bathroom or against lockers, or, like I said, surrounded in the parking lot, and fist fights and all that craziness. I'm not the kind of person who can deal with that kind of ridiculousness. Do people come that way? I suppose they must. Anyways, so that's the setting. I had dropped out halfway between during my junior year of high school, and I did not have any friends at the time. I had lost all my friends in the process, and was spending all of my time basically staying up all night, and then sleeping for most of the day. I think that's what all teenagers do when they no longer adhere to the social rules and requirements. And I would spend my days reading on the front porch, and really very solitary time in my life and introspective, and not even remotely prepared for what the next stage of my life was going to look like. It was kind of like a reconvening in a way. I had tons of just intense dreams, like where the back wall of my room would dissolve and then these huge rolling clouds would come over, in front of me, and then different conversations. I'll save some of that for another video and get back to the point. But it was just an incredibly profound time in my life where I felt like I was really being dealt with by spiritual forces, as a way of saying it, and having dropped out of school. And then these guys moved in next door to me. So I'm 17 years old, and these 21, 22-year-old guys move in next door. And one of them happened to work at the gas station nearby. So I would stay up all night, and what I would do is go over to the gas station in the middle of the night when I was supposed to be, obviously staying put. But after everyone else was in bed, that's what I would do. I would go over there and rent a movie often. That was usually what I did, or just a way to get out. And there's a freedom in the middle of the night. There's a quiet peacefulness in the middle of the night. It's just you and the big black sky. It's quite lovely. You don't hear everybody's noise so much, and so you can really kind of tune into the silent stillness of nature. Or like, nature isn't silent, but that natural quality of sound that seems to be like almost musical when you're not hearing a bunch of traffic and all of the extras banging around that we do during the daytime. So I loved walking around at night, and that was an excuse to go do it and just be under the stars for a little bit. And so I got to know the next door neighbor, the one that worked night shifts over there. And one day he invited me over. So, I'm a 17-year-old girl, and an older guy just invited me over for a party they were having at some point. And so, of course, I went and ended up becoming friends with these people. And him and another guy who had just come back from the Gulf War, actually. He was in the airborne. So about as macho as it gets at that point. He was young, he was extraordinarily fit, and he had just come back from that intense experience. Highly trained man, for sure. And so we ended up going rock climbing. So this was not, hey, let's get some gear and let's go scale a cliff. This was, let's go to the cliffs and go off trail. So there was no gear involved. There was no training involved. Nobody knew what they were doing, right? So it was just kind of one of those adventures that young people go on because they forget at that time that they are able to be able to meet the consequences. If you hadn't had very many of them yet, been exposed to them yet, you're still kind of dumb to that when you're young. And so yeah, we were rock climbing basically on the cliffs. There's a river between Minnesota, the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and the cliffs are pretty sheer. They can get 50 feet, some probably higher than that. Down the Minnesota, or in between the Minnesota River. I think it's either the Minnesota or the St. Croix River that goes in between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we were on those cliff banks. I'll see if I can grab a picture of it so I can figure out how to attach it here so you can see something. And as we're scaling these cliffs and rock faces, it finally dawned on me that they were way stronger and more capable than I was to do what they were doing, and that if I didn't want to die, I needed to stop following them. So, my plan was to go back up to the trail, and I attempted to do that. The trail was not that far. There was a boulder, basically, that kind of like came up to, chest height boulder. And if I got onto that kind of flat-faced surface, and then I could kind of keep going up to the trail, I'd be fine. If I kept going along the side of the boulder and following them, then that's where things got really dicey and sheer. And so there was a tree that was about, I don't know, 7 inches diameter, maybe not, maybe 6 inches diameter, enough for both my hands to go around it. I grabbed the tree and I was going to try to like get a little momentum and heave myself up, onto the boulder. There was a tiny little place to put my foot to try to like get a little momentum up there. And I kind of tried to do that hop up onto the boulder, to like shimmy myself up the rest of the way. The tree cracked and I went down. And so it was like, maybe it's hard to gauge how far I actually fell, but it was like maybe, let's say 20 feet going through the tree line and all the trees and hitting the brush and all of that. And then the last 10 or so feet was free fall. I landed on my back on a boulder, rolled off the boulder to the edge of the river. When I had landed, I felt that my back had broken. You don't have to wonder when something like that happens. You can feel it. It's quite a shock to the system. And so I stopped moving, facing the water. I am curling my toes inside my shoes so that I keep feeling that I'm not paralyzed. So the guy that was from Airborne was immediately, he flew next to me. So quickly he was there, and he was talking me through it, keeping me calm. He had just come back from, he just got out of the military, so he was well aware of some of the ways to keep a person calm. I can't think of a better person to be the very first voice that I was hearing. He was keeping me very calm and reassuring me that, we fell all the time when we were in training, and you'll be sore for a few days, but you're going to shake it off. Now, I knew for sure that my back was broken, so, I was staying calm, but I said nobody is touching me unless they're a paramedic, because I was starting, the pain was pretty instantaneous, and it's a really hard pain to describe, basically, because the nerves had been damaged in my back. And so I had feeling, but it was like everything was on, that feeling like after, if you sit on your arm wrong for 20 minutes and the blood starts rushing back to it. It's that weird kind of pins and needle feeling. It was like that, but sensitive to the air. There's no other pain that I've ever had that's like that, so I don't even know how to describe it. That's the closest that I can get to. And within, maybe 2 minutes after he was there, all these other people were there. And I was in shock, but I was also aware, how do people get there that quick? We were way off, deep into the park. It's a state park, and we were deep into it, so I didn't know how people could possibly get there that quick. And there's all these men around me suddenly, and I said, nobody's touching me unless you're a paramedic, because my back is broken. And they said, we're all paramedics. So, okay. How did, 10 paramedics suddenly show up around me? They weren't in uniform, right? And the reason that they weren't in uniform is because they had been taking their summer cruise. They had a barbecue with their wives and got together every year during the summer, and they were on a riverboat, and they were going by at the exact time that I fell. I think a couple of their wives took pictures of the incident, and they were there immediately. You couldn't get rescued any faster than that. So they knew exactly how to stabilize a person with a broken back. They put me on a table and made sure that I was secure. They knew how to carry me onto the boat. Normal rescue for an event like that would have been by speedboat, and because the bone that did get broken in my back was crushed, any other method of rescue would have left me paralyzed, because there's just no way that they would have been able to avoid the jostling of the bone in that area. And so they got me onto the riverboat. The riverboat got me to the ramp where a paramedics ambulance was waiting, and the ambulance took me off to the hospital. And this was all before the other guy that we were with had even gotten back to the main area. And this was 30 years ago, right? So none of us had cell phones. There was no calling from where we were at. So he had been trying to book it back to the state park office to call in the emergency, just to put that in a little perspective of how quickly I was rescued and the state of the miracle. So it's just always been one of those experiences to me that has really held me when I got full of doubt, and you could go through this life really feeling like I suck and nobody loves me and it's all too hard and how am I ever gonna survive, and it's also confusing and chaos, and people will not always make it easy. There's bullies in every level of our society, and there's also people who will just challenge you because you need to be challenged as part of your spiritual growth. And when I would go through those tough times, then I had this story of yeah, but that was a miracle. So I'm going to keep on, I'm going to keep on pushing through whatever the hard thing that came before me was. And it's nice to have a story like that. It just always felt so much a miracle. And I know this is getting a little long, but I'll just add this other weird aspect to it, because I think understanding, in my mind, it was a bit of a a Mandela effect type weirdness. I've been rescued. This is just one of my rescue stories. I've had to be rescued other times. I feel like anyways, a person that needs to be rescued often. But another weird part of this story, and this why it felt like a Mandela effect, because it was just the ambulance, the paramedics were right there, and it just all went so smooth. And then I did end up going back the next year to finish high school. I was able to finish the credits needed that I missed my junior year in my last year. I actually went to a Catholic school for 12th grade, and they had different credit requirements, so I was able to get it all done in 1 year. I had a back brace on, and it was, they were able to fix me up with, by putting in, rods and pins and stabilizing everything, and then I just had to wear a brace for 6 months. So, it was so awkward. So I was in a Catholic school uniform and big, huge back brace. Did I get bullied though? No, I didn't, so it's just kind of one of those weird things that sometimes life will just completely, upend everything and put you back in a nice little cradle of possibility again. And that school did a lot of good for me. It got me into college later because the teachers really worked one-on-one with me to make sure that I graduated and that I did well, and I did do well. That, hey, getting a little attention from your teachers is actually a really good thing. Who knew? And they were able to write letters for me, so I got into college later, did well on ACTs and things like that. So it all turned out well in the end, from being a high school dropout to 7-8 months later, back in school and being repaired and all of that. But what I was going to add, the other weird paradox is, well, I'll save that for another video because this one's getting kind of long. But I just wanted to share that, like, this one of the greatest little miracle events I had in my life that helped to inform my views on reality, and know that it's not always quite so black and white, and we don't always have to take it on first and face value that every action has an obvious consequence to follow it. There is this weird dynamic of grace and paradox and yeah, so just wanted to share that with you. I hope you're having a good week. I hope everything is going well for you, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.